In this video, we'll be going over the best and worst tile on every single map in Dead by Daylight. Let's get started. Starting us off strong, the brand new map Nostromo Wreckage. I don't know too much about this map since it's so new, but from what I've seen, the best loop is the circle loop in main building. It's incredibly strong since it's so long and you have perfect visibility of the killer while looping it. For the worst loop, it's probably just going to be the corner map crashed building. Inside the building, there's literally nothing to loop, and outside there's just one kinda unsafe pallet. Next up from the same realm, Toba Landing. The best tile on Toba would definitely be the main building. It has a ton of windows and pallets, as well as multiple places where you can get balanced landing value. Most of the loops on main honestly just feel really safe. For worst, I'd have to give it to this L window. It's just kinda there, doesn't really offer much. Next up, we got Shattered Square. This map isn't great in my opinion, so for the best, I'll keep it simple and just give it to Shack. For the worst though, I'll give it to this weird house building corner map. It has literally nothing to offer, no windows or pallets. Very weak for a tile and very weak for a map overall. Now for Garden of Joy. The best tile here is without a doubt the main building. This tile has windows everywhere, a few pallets, and multiple areas where you can get balanced landing value. Even with the pallets gone, the windows still stay really strong. For the worst tile, I'll give it to whatever this thing is. It's just kind of a random window and it doesn't have anything to go with it. It's really hard to chain this loop with other loops around the map, so for that reason, I'll be giving it the worst tile. Next up is Eyrie of Crows. This map isn't terrible, but it doesn't offer much for unique and strong tiles. Because of that, I think the strongest tile is probably just Shack. The worst tile though, without a doubt, is the main building. There's almost nothing to offer aside from 1 to 2 windows and maybe a pallet upstairs. I never stay at main building when on this map because there really isn't anything too safe to loop there. Following that, we have Raccoon City West. The best tile here is the side room with at least 1 pallet, sometimes 2, as well as 3 windows. Although one of the windows is kinda useless, the rest of the resources here are very versatile. For the worst, I'll give it to the unsafe office filler pallet on the 2nd floor. Just way too easy to get mind gamed at this pallet, and it really doesn't feel like it has much value. For the east variants of the map, I would say the best and worst are exactly the same as the west. Now for Midwich Elementary. The best tile on this map isn't really a tile, it's more just the sheer amount of pallets this map has in close proximity. Seriously, look at this. It's insane how many pallets you can chain together on this map. And honestly, I didn't even show all of them in this clip. For the worst tile though, it would probably be the solo window at one of the exit gates. Overall, very unsafe to loop and very hard to get any real value out of. Next, we have Dead Dog Saloon. The best is definitely main building, without a doubt. The windows spread out across the building are all relatively safe, as well as the pallets around the outside of the building. Even looping the bar area has some viability against some killers. For the worst tile, I'll just give it to Gallows. The window is incredibly easy to mind game as killer, and the rest of the tile doesn't really have anything to offer, although it can be good for balanced landing. Next up is Mount Ormond Resort, one of my favorite maps. For the best tile, I'll give it to the main building yet again, just because the windows on the top floor as well as the god pallet spawn make the entire tile really viable to loop. The first floor usually has 1 to 2 pallets and a decently safe window, overall making it very strong to play. For the worst though, I'll give it to this weird elevated room thing. It has 1 window that honestly isn't even that safe. It does spawn a chest though, which is pretty nice. Following that, we have Sanctum of Wrath. The best tile on this map goes to the elevated 2-window tile. This tile can be an infinite if run correctly, and most killers and survivors usually don't know the full potential of this tile, which makes it even stronger against unaware killers. For the worst tile, I'll give it to this very unsafe pallet by main building. What's even worse about it is the fact that there's a 50-50 chance that basement spawns right next to it. For family residents, the best tile is honestly just the same as it was on Sanctum. And for the worst, I'll give it to the exact same style of building that was the best on Sanctum, but instead it only has 1 window in the middle. Very unsafe to loop, and you usually can't chain it into anything useful either. Now for Gideon's Meat Plant. I think the best tile, or tiles, on this map would definitely be the 2 pallet 1 window room. This room has 2 extremely safe pallets, a relatively safe window, and a hole for balanced landing gamers. This tile is unbelievably safe as long as you know what you're doing. For the worst tile, I'll give it to the elevated window by one of the exit gates. Honestly, it just feels really unsafe, and you can't usually get any value out of it against a good killer. Next, we have all of the Badham preschool maps. I'm grouping them all together because as far as I know, all the tiles on these maps are the exact same, just different layouts on the map. For the best tile, I'll give it to the infamous House of Pain. This tile is extremely strong against most killers as it has very safe and strong windows, as well as a guaranteed god pallet in the basement. One of the best tiles in the game by far, and always fun to loot. For the worst tile, I'll give it to this single window outside of main main building. It can be good to take this window and chase and keep running, but aside from that, it's almost impossible to loop safely. Next up, we have the Grim Pantry. This is one of my favorite maps simply because its best tile is so strong. For the best tile, without a doubt, I'll give it to the main building. The 4+ windows as well as the double window setup is so fun to loop and extremely strong against most killers. On top of that, main building also has 1 to 2 relatively safe pallets as well. For the worst tile, I'll give it to this log. Maybe it's just a skill issue on my part, but whenever I try and loop it, I do not have a good time. Following that, we have Pale Rose. For the best tile, I'd probably say Docks takes the title. This map isn't amazing when it comes to tiles, but the Docks do provide some pretty strong loops, as well as some decent counterplay to most killers. The chain window setup is also really strong. For the worst tile, I'll give it to the main building, simply because there really isn't too many spots you can safely loop, aside from maybe 1 or 2 pallets. Next, we have Temple of Purgation. For the best, it's definitely the main building. This tile has so many safe windows and a decent amount of pallets, including 1 god pallet. This tile can be useful in early game all the way to late game without much issue. For worst, I'll keep it simple and just give it to the Z-wall. I know most maps have this tile, and they would probably consider it their worst tile, but honestly, that's no fun. I'm gonna try and keep it creative. For Mother's Dwelling, I'd say the best tile is main building again. It has a ton of strong windows with scattered pallets along the outside. I always feel relatively safe when looping this tile since it has so many resources to offer. For worst, again, I'll keep it simple and give it to the Z-wall. Next up, we got the Treatment Theater. For the best tile, I'll give it to the library. If you get lucky with generation, you can get some insane windows. Plus, this tile always guarantees at least 1 god pallet. Overall, just a very strong and solid tile. For worst, I'd probably give it to this pallet on the corner map. It's just kinda mid. Easy to mind game, only really good for life value, or maybe smash hit. Following that, we have Lampkin Lane. This map has a lot of decent tiles, but for the best, I'll give it to this specific building, since it has 3 windows on the first floor, as well as a decent layout you can loop upstairs, and get balanced landing value on top of that. The windows on the first floor can actually be an infinite if the killer doesn't chase optimally. For the worst, I'll give it to this specific backyard pallet, since it's really unsafe to loop and doesn't provide much value otherwise. For Father Campbell's Chapel, I'd say the best tile here is just Shack. It's stronger than most of the other tiles on the map, although simple, it's very effective. For worst, I'll give it to the corner map Circus. It does have 1 kinda safe window, but aside from that, I don't love the other loops present here, especially the pallets. It could definitely be better all around. Next, we have the Disturbed Ward. For best, without a doubt, it's the main building. The window on the first floor that leads out of the building is extremely strong, and the pallets strung out through the building are pretty safe. It's also one of my favorite tiles to loot personally. For the worst, I'll give it to this specific rock. No pallets, no windows. I don't know what the devs were thinking with this one, honestly. Now for the most infamous and recognizable maps in the game, Autohaven, Coldwind, and Macmillan. For these maps, a lot of the best and worst are similar since all of these maps are structured the same, relatively speaking, with the only differences usually being the main building. With that being said, let's start with the Autohaven collection. First up, we have Wrecker's Yard. For best, I'll give it to Funbus. Since this map doesn't have a main building or any other unique tiles, it's a viable tile, very fun. Okay, I'll stop. And all around a solid loop. For worst, it's Shack. Before you bite my head off in the comments, instead of giving worst to some random Z-wall in the corner map, I thought a layer deeper than that. Since this map doesn't have a main building, the basement is guaranteed to be in Shack no matter what. So, the loop by itself is one of the strongest in the game, yes, but if you mess up at this loop and go down, you're almost guaranteed to get basemented, and if this happens against a Plague or god forbid a Bubba, there's a very low chance you'll get to survive. Next up, for Blood Lodge, it's almost the dead opposite of Wrecker's Yard. The best tile on this map is Shack. It's just really strong, really versatile, and stronger than anything else present on this map. For the worst, I'll give it to the 2-window tile, exclusive to Autohaven and Macmillan. Overall, it's just kinda weak. It can be viable, but I prefer not to loop this tile. Next up, we got Azerov's Resting Place. For best tile on this map, I'll give it to Shack. Enough said, all of us know by now why Shack is so good. For worst, well, I'll give it to Worst Shack. It's the exact same layout, just across the map and minus the palette. It is legitimately a building with a window, and that is all. Up next, we have the Wretched Shop. For best tile on this map, I'll give it to, yet again, Shack. Look, I'm doing my best to be creative on these maps, but they really do not have much to offer when it comes to creativity. For the worst, it'll go to main building. It really does not have much to offer, and most of the time, if you get caught here, it's a death sentence. Following that, we have Gas Haven, one of the best Autohaven maps. For the best tile on this map, I'll give it to the main building. With multiple somewhat safe pallets, as well as a really strong long wall window, this loop is very strong against most killers. For worst tile, I'll give it to the elevated green truck. It only has 1 window vault, and most of the time, if the killer knows you're going for this loop, they can cut you off really easily. All around, just not very safe. Next up, we have Fractured Cowshed, the designated 1v1 map. For best tile, I'll give it to the main building. Very strong windows here, as well as decently strong safe pallets around the outside of the building. Always fun to loop without being too overpowered. For the worst tile, I'll probably give it to whatever this thing is. Seriously, what were the devs thinking when adding this tile? Also, for the Coldwind maps, get used to seeing this thing in place of worst tile. Up next, we have rotten fields. Keeping it simple again, the best tile here is Pantry. Very strong loop against most killers with a very strong pallet and window, with little mind game potential from the killer. For the worst tile, I'm giving it to Shack. We've been over this already, I don't need to give my reasoning again. Following that, we have Torment Creek. For the best tile, I'll give it to main building. Strong window even when the breakable wall is open, and decently safe pallets around the outside. For worst, yet again, this thing. I would literally rather loop a rock than go anywhere near this thing. Next, we have the Thompson House. Following the same trend as the other Coldwind maps, main building takes the prize for the best tile yet again. There's strong windows scattered throughout it, as well as some huge balance landing potential. For worst, you guessed it, yet again, this thing. It's not even a tile, why is it in the game? Lastly, for the Coldwind maps, Rancid Abattoir. For best, I'll give it to Pration. Versatile and solid loop, nothing bad to say about it. For worst, it pains me to say, but main building. It used to be one of the best loops in the game, but behavior butchered it. It has one kind of unsafe pallet and a decent window that loses most potential as soon as the killer breaks the breakable wall. Old main building will be forever remembered in our hearts. For the final 5, we have Groaning Storehouse to start. For the best tile, it goes to main building. Strong loop for distance, plus the windows spread out are relatively strong. It also has 1 to 2 very strong pallets. For the worst, it goes to the Macmillan Autohaven specific tile, the 2 window. It's just overall not amazing, not very versatile either. Next up, we got Suffocation Pit, my absolute favorite map in the game. For best tile, it won't be any one tile specifically. Instead, I'm giving it to the middle map as a whole. The middle map for this map has 4 to 5 extremely strong tiles. With good map RNG and some skill, you can chain 2 to 3 windows together for a really long and safe chase. For worst, yet again, I'm gonna give it to the 2 window tile, specifically when it's alone and you can't chain it into any other tiles. Now for Ironworks of Missouri. The best tile on this map goes to Shack. Shocker. The worst goes to main building. All it really has is 2 windows and both of them are pretty weak. Strong for balanced landing gaming and that's about it. Second to last, we have Shelter Woods. The new version of this map is actually surprisingly strong, so for the best tile, I'll give it to the new main building. Lots of safe pallet loops and some very strong window long walls. For the worst tile, I'll give it to the specific window. And finally, last but not least, Coal Tower. I like all the loops on this map, all of them are very close, but for the best, I gotta give it to Shack. It just shines a bit above all the other loops on this map. For the worst, I'll give it to the main building. This is excluding tiles like Z-walls, just because the worst tile on every map can't be a Z-wall. But the reason I think main building is the worst is because once the breakable walls are broken, it becomes a lot harder to loop the windows. It does provide balanced landing value and has some okay pallets surrounding it, but aside from that, it doesn't really have too much to offer. And that's it for the worst and best tile on every single map. It took me 3 months to record just the audio for this video, and it's hopefully not going to be too much longer before this video is out and you guys can watch it. I'm not sure what I'm going to do next, but there's been a lot of changes to Dead by Daylight recently, so we'll have to see what the future holds. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. Good night, and peace.